This one on product packaging of AI functionality. My name is Ulrik. In case you didn't know, I'm the founder of a company called Willingness to Pay. We do pricing for complex B2B SaaS. We have done a bunch of pricing for AI products, also before ChatGPT launched. So even back when, it was called sort of, let's say, like original artificial intelligence, machine learning products, all these things. And so I decided that I wanted to sort of give a little bit of like a webinar or lecture series on some of the things that, let's say, the angles on pricing and packaging and monetization as I see that they're relevant for AI. But today, here's the agenda. I'm going to recap the strategy and concept from last week. It's going to take all of 60 seconds. And then I'm going to walk you through 7 very, very simple models for just as when I made the slides for today, like full disclosure, I almost thought that they were too simple. It's like, okay, this is like, I'm trying to run a serious business here. Really, can people be interested in this? But I actually thought, hey, maybe this is the level at which we need to start the conversation. So I just have 7 very, very simple models of plays, if you will, on how to introduce AI in existing products. And I'll discuss some of the pros and cons of each and how they work. And then I'm actually going to go through 8 basic pricing models. And I know that we're going to talk about packaging, but in a sense, I thought that this was sort of the appropriate time to sort of bring it in, because some of the pricing models around how the fee structures are even going to work are very relevant to how they're packaged. So are we even monetizing this? Are we not monetizing it? And so forth. So I was considering this sort of at a basic level on as a sort of a packaging topic. Then I'm going to go over packaging for native AI products. So you're building a new business and it's sort of AI first, or build on AI. And then finally, I'm going to talk you through my sort of top 5 mistakes of where I see people mess up. I am going to try to aim for a relatively quick run through of this. So 20, 25 minutes. And then we're going to have as much time, 20, 25 minutes for Q&A. Yeah, this is me. Studied philosophy, went to Harvard, built some businesses. Now I've been into pricing for a decade, had a lot of fun with it, wrote some books, all good fun. All right. We actually have a lot of ongoing pricing projects in our consulting business right now. We're doing 7 of those. That's roughly half of our ongoing projects are with very large AI components. So one of the reasons for even sort of starting up a pricing project. We've done maybe 20 or so in the past out of a total portfolio of, I think, 150, 200 projects and so forth. So recap, strategy and concepts. Don't want to bore you with this, but I think that the reason that AI is interesting right now and why it's hard to price and why a lot of people are looking for ways to price is because we're dealing with a fundamentally sort of slight difference compared to a lot of other, let's say, new functionality. And that is that we have a lot of change on capabilities and costs. So the idea is that whatever AI can do today, it can probably do twice as well tomorrow at half the cost. And exactly at what rate that capability increases and what rate that cost decreases is unknown. And this creates a lot of uncertainty in what kind of strategy we should pursue. It means that businesses don't know if they should try and capture market now or if it will be worthless because a new competitor next year can build the same product twice as fast for half the money and then just like poach my customers again. And that also means that we don't know if we should niche down and try to go for a very small market with the risk of losing it again, or we should try and go broad from a product perspective. And then that also means that we don't know if we should charge based on a niche down value proposition or an outcome-based pricing for a specific target customer, or if we should price based on, let's say, infrastructure inputs in a more sort of, let's say, utility format for pricing. So essentially, this boils down to sort of 2 overall strategies. One I call value and one I call commodity. And basically, they are bets on what's going to happen with AI as a business model in the future. And then the commodity scenario says that, AI will drive the price of everything down to the cost of electricity. Sam Altman had a quote to the same extent on his blog recently. And if that's true, then the correct strategy is to try and make money now, to not lose, do not overpay for new customers, and to hold back on product investment. So be prudent, don't lose. Opportunity will present itself for the ones who have dry powder later on. The other scenario is that no, there's a lot of value to be had. We can price for value in AI products. And that means that we should try and get as many customers as we can right now, as fast as we can, maybe even at loss, and we can then monetize later. We're going to talk about some of the aspects of this throughout today and also in the next sessions when we talk about outcome-based pricing and so forth. But now, 7 extremely simple versions of how we can introduce AI in existing products. So if you already have an existing product, that means that you already have existing packaging. You might have a platform with some modules, you might have some tiers, you might have a lot of SKUs, you might have a few SKUs. I've just chosen to have a very sort of simplified visual language to just represent sort of the different sort of approaches here. So the first version is, and I see this quite a bit, is that you take your new AI functionality and then you put it as a premium feature in your highest tier. So it's like an enterprise functionality on your premium tier. So it's the most expensive product you have that encompasses the most functionality. Now also get the AI features. This is what I call the upsell motion. So basically we're saying, hey, we want more people to buy our large and more expensive tier of product. So we put the AI in there to make it more attractive. The idea would be that we might make money on the AI functionality itself, but we might also force or entice more people to buy the larger product. So we make money twice, a larger purchase and for AI. I think for several reasons that this is usually not a good strategy because it's very intuitive in that, like if this works, we will get paid a lot. So it's like a high risk, high reward type scenario where it's like fundamentally the tactics sort of like they map out, it work on paper, right? But in reality, what happens is that the AI often has untested value. Customers don't really know what it does yet. And they're not willing to risk the higher purchase for this. And your salespeople have to work a lot to try and sell the new AI functionality. And they usually get a relatively low attach rate. So out of 100 customers, only a small proportion, 5%, 10%, whatever, but not all of them actually get the new AI functionality, which also means that the rate of learning about what value you actually bring with this new functionality is lower than if you had more customers enjoying the functionality. So it's one of these things where if it actually works and you suddenly have a big push that people just like, push each other aside to now buy your most premium tier, then this is probably the right play. But I just never see it happening, right? I always sort of see it happening as an argument from sales that this is where we should put it so we can like upsell to this more expensive product. But in reality, it almost always fails. So then if you realize this, which is why they then try to monetize it in the next way, which is that, we're going to take the AI functionality or we're going to sell it as a separate standalone product. So it becomes an add-on. So this is where the AI becomes added on to, or it becomes a separate line item that customers choose actively to buy. And then they can then apply to the rest of their product. So this creates a similar situation where the attach rate, so the number of customers that actually has the AI functionality is relatively low. And you're actually spending a lot of sales resources to try and sell the new add-on. So usually what happens is that your salespeople will focus on the add-on in their upsell motions and their renewal motions. Actually, what usually happens also is that add-ons tends to be then given away cheaper in renewal and negotiations. So, hey, we're going to renew you on the contract for another 3 years, and we're going to throw in this AI, and it's going to be really cheap. So it gets used as a bargaining chip very often in scenarios like this. And also, not a lot of customers compared to the whole actually get the AI functionality. So also not a big fan of having AI as just an add-on. Obviously, for this or the previous, there can be product-specific reasons for why this totally makes sense for you, right? So take this as general guidance on whether this, as a general argument, let's say, makes sense or plays. So I'm giving you my experience working with a bunch of companies on something like this. So the next version is something like this, which actually I think often is quite viable, which is that we just say, we now have AI and we're trying to build it in everywhere. So we're going to build in AI in the entry-level product, in the premium product, everywhere that we can apply AI, we're just going to build it in. This can be great because now at least everybody has the AI functionality. This also puts some pressure on, well, how are you now going to make money? This is actually why I'm bringing the pricing model sort of in the next section of this, where we're going to talk about that. So the idea is that it comes sort of as a let's say, fitted feature for the product that you have. So you don't actually need to convince customers to buy the AI. You can just say, well, it has AI functionality. And then you can talk about how it's priced, how the cost structure is, and all these other things, but as a separate product choice that now no longer exists. I think this can make a ton of sense. Something else that can make sense, but a little bit less so, is that you try to scale the functionality. So you say something like, oh, we're going to have a little AI in the first tier, like in the small product we have, and then we're going to have like all of the AI or the most of the AI functionality in the higher tier package. I think that there are ways in which you can be smart with this, and there are ways in which you can be dumb with this. Unfortunately, I see dumb more than smart in ways to execute this. But this actually often has to do with the underlying package, because if you have a traditional good, better, best structure where essentially you're trying to create a outcome for the customer, but you have some, let's say, simple, let's say, better, and then all of the features in your tier structure, it can become really hard to then determine what is the right level of AI for this particular product or tier. So I think this approach actually tends to work better if you have what I would call job to be done or outcome-based packaging. So if you already have packaging that is, let's say, very focused on a specific outcome that you're going to reach for your customer with this product, I'll give a few examples a little bit later when we're talking about native AI products, then it can make sense to say, let's say that you have a sales product, and the first product that you sell has to do with generating pipeline. And then the next product has to do with generating conversion rate, like more value from the pipeline. And maybe the last product has to do with managing large teams. So now each of the packages have very distinct and specific and separate outcomes. And then AI can support those specific outcomes. So you would have AI specific to pipeline in the first product, AI specific to conversion rate in the second product, and AI specific to collaboration and automation and governance, etc., in the third product. With that, it can make a lot of sense to just have it. It also just in this way just becomes another type of feature that you input across the board in your product. If you have a platform structure, could be something like this, where if you not have a tier structure, but you just have some underlying functionality, and then you have modules, you can of course place the AI functionality in the platform itself, applied to every module in some way, or you can move the functionality down into the modules and have it applied there, a little bit like the jobs to be done. So I think overall, these are sort of the approaches that I see. I like this one the best, the jobs to be done focused packaging, where you have AI that is, let's say, inserted into the product in a way that is very much directed at reaching the outcome that you're already selling in that package. And that is where I see it generates the most value, because now it actually is focused on the outcome of the product, so what the customer get, and not the functionality of AI itself, which I think is a huge deal. Basic pricing models. So these can, of course, be more or less combined with all the different sort of packaging structures you have, and there are different sort of pros and cons to them. So the first one that I see that some people do is that they say, well, we're just going to give AI away for free. So regardless of any volume of usage, let's just call that, any kind of volume of usage of the AI product, we're not going to charge for it. We're just going to give you the AI. And this can be whether we are putting it into the top tier, whether we're placing it in all of the tiers, whether we're scaling it, or whether we're doing some sort of job to be done specific version of it. We can, of course, choose to just not monetize. Just say, hey, we're going to, whatever pricing model we already have in place, we're just going to assume that that actually does all of the heavy lifting and we'll make our money in that way. So if you do payroll software and you put in your AI and you're already charging per payslip, then presumably maybe you'll process more payslips, or you'll get more customers, or you'll win more business, or your churn rate will drop, or whatever it is. But it will actually be good for your business. So we'll choose just not to charge for it despite the cost. That is sometimes a problem because AI products do have costs. And since we might not have control of the usage volume, we might have a CFO that is very worried that we're going to essentially give a blank check, usage check to our customers, and they can then just like go wild and generate costs for us that are out of control, which is why we sometimes do a fair usage limit. So a fair usage limit would be something that is not discussed in the sales context, but is just buried in the terms and conditions saying, hey, you have unlimited usage on the AI, except that the fine print says that if you hit this limit, whatever, 1 trillion API calls or whatever it is, we're going to either, two options, stop you, so stop the service, or to charge you. Sometimes fair usage is enforced, sometimes it's not enforced, but in many ways, it can be a reasonably good way to have to let's say, safeguard yourself from a otherwise free model. And since it's free, I think it's perfectly reasonable and fair to also put some sort of limitation in place. I would say that a lot of people actually have fair usage models that just don't use them well enough. I had a 30 million ARR client once that actually, when we did the math, they could collect another 27 million on fair usage policies that were just overdrawn. And so it can pay off to sometimes check. All right. The next version that you can have with AI is to just have a flat fee. So it's a license fee, it's flat. And then you can just say, okay, it costs whatever, 5,000 a month to use the AI functionality. And that's just it. And then at that rate, you can do whatever you want with it. I actually have a question over here. MV, you ask, why do you believe we can't start as an add-on and then move it to premium packaging, then to base in the same way as we adopt new products? So maybe you can. I don't know your product, so I don't know exactly what it is that it does. I would say if you start with an add-on, then you're going to have all the sales costs of selling it. And then if it already works, why would you then move it to a premium feature and then later move it to base? It sounds like a lot of work for something that you should be able to figure out day one with regard to what the functionality, what the AI actually does for your product. So it isn't that it can't be done. It's rather like, why would you do it that way? I think you have other and faster ways to monetize it. That's so the generic answer. If you want a better answer, give me a little bit more context, and then we'll do it. Okay, so flat license fee works in this way. This, of course, can work especially for an add-on where it is a separate product. You just charge a number for it, and then it works like that. Or you can, of course, also just add it as another line item to the existing products and say, hey, everybody gets AI, but now all of your prices just goes up, whatever, 5,000 a month or whatever the price is. And it can even be a separate line item on the invoice, even though it is in the same product and it cannot be unchosen. So this is also a great way to do it. And of course, you can also put fair usage limits on flat fees, right? So you can say, hey, it's 5,000 a month for unlimited usage up until like 1 trillion calls or whatever it is, or 1 million tokens, at which point we're going to say, hey, you're using the product in an unintended way, and we're going to either stop you or charge you. Of course, you can also do a volume-based model. So price per token, price per user, price per payslip, whatever you just whatever metric you use, you can just say, hey, we're going to price you per this. It can be a license still, something paid up front. It can be usage, something that is measured and paid in arrears. It can be a credit mark, doesn't really matter. But the idea is that the price is per something. So it goes up as volume goes up. So this scales, and then you don't need to have the fair usage limitation, because if they use 1 trillion of it, you just get paid 1 trillion. So this is all good. You're all aligned. You can combine them. So you can say, we actually would like to charge a flat fee, 5,000 to start. And then charge you for the volume. So there is a base fee for having access to the functionality, and then there is a fee for then using it even from out of the gate. This is usually where this kind of structure is usually very, very good for larger accounts. So if you have larger accounts, they don't mind the higher base fee because it drowns out in their massive volumes. But it can be, let's say, harder to sell to smaller accounts who doesn't have a good volume. So they actually would pay a high, they say, average price for the volume they have. So that can be a little bit difficult. But maybe you actually do not want to sell your AI product to these small accounts. You actually want to sell it to larger accounts. So for larger accounts, it can actually promote the price relatively well because the incremental price for the next unit on average drops pretty aggressively. You can also, of course, do an included volume. So you can say, hey, the first 10,000 tokens are free, or the first 10,000 chats or whatever it is. And above that, we're going to charge you based on the volume. And then finally, you can say that you're going to have a flat fee, 5,000 a month, but that actually covers some initial volume. Maybe it covers whatever the first 5,000 chats or whatever it is. And then you pay on a usage-based, a volume-based model after that. My personal favorite that we do in most of our projects is this one. Included volume in an existing product with then a price per as we go up. Then we usually combine it with something like this or something like this. So we say you have an outcome-based packaging. AI is already built into your product. The first hit is free, so the first X number of tokens or usage counters or whatever pay slips are included in the way that you work. But if you pass this particular limit, then you have to pay. And then depending on whether we do a license or usage-based credit systems, whatever it is, that can then look a little bit different. Usage-based, we would just start to send them invoices. License-based, we would just stop their usage whenever they hit this particular volume. And then a salesperson would reach out and say, hey, you spent all your included volume. Now you need to buy some more. Let's have that conversation. But this then means that the product, in a little bit like a PLG kind of way, allows customers to explore the value before they actually really buy something or have to pay for their usage. So this is a really good way to promote expansion and adoption of the product because 100% of your customers have access to the product and 100% of your customers can try the product without having to pay for it and sometimes without even having to contract for it. So this is a very powerful model for existing products to spread AI functionality across their install base. So packaging for native AI products. So this is a little bit similar to what we've already seen, but there are a few sort of nuances here that I want to just touch on. So of course, if you are a new company and you have an AI product and you want to take it to market, the simplest way to do it is to just say, we have a product and you can now buy it. And then you can figure out whatever the pricing is for that, whether you want to do per user, per token, per AI call, per whatever it is in a license model, credit model, etc. But you just have a product. It doesn't need to be advanced in any way. That's the simplest version, which is up until the first 2, 3, 5 million bucks ARR, perfectly viable for most people. If you want to do a little bit more, then of course you can do some sort of a good, better, best where you say, hey, we're going to have, like say, 3 tiers, basic, pro, enterprise, or whatever it is. And we're going to have some features in the first and all of the features in the last. And then you get to buy the one that you like the most. One thing that I see a lot of as well, and actually more and more, especially as the ability to gate and gather data from accounts, is that we see what I call thresholds. So here I've just used users as an example, but it would be something like in the first product, you say, oh, max 5 users, whatever, or max 5 locations. And then in the second product, you say, oh, max 25 users, whatever it is. And then you have unlimited ones here. So it's actually not something you price, but it is something that you limit. So it's a threshold so that you force an upgrade in this packaging. And it can be a sort of really great way for you to actually promote upsells across a product structure like this. Fundamentally, though, I think just stating features in the good, better, best way is subpar. It doesn't give you as good results as a value-based or outcome-based packaging where you focus the packages on jobs to be done. So the idea would be to do similar, let's say 3-tier structure, but have a very, very clear focus on what the outcomes are. First outcome, second outcome, third outcome. I think actually I have the example with me. I was on a podcast yesterday where we talked about a sales tool, and the guy that had the sales tool, he had 3 tiers. He had basic, premium, and enterprise. And then we talked about it, and I said, basically, why don't you repackage? And then just as an example, I said, you could do pipeline conversion and large teams. So the difference between these two is that nobody knows what basic is, and nobody wants basic. Nobody wants premium either, right? So it isn't generating. I know it's better, but I don't know what it's better at, and I don't know what kind of outcome I get from buying basic or premium. Presumably, it has something to do with sales, which is nice. But now I need to go and investigate the features in each of these products. So I basically need to sort of understand which features are here. What does it mean that I have X users and so forth? Which means that the whole sales motion in a traditional good, better, best structure gets very feature oriented. If you have something like this where you say, oh, the first product sells you pipeline, and then the next one sells you conversion rate. Most salespeople will know what pipeline is worth to them. So they'll say, hey, if I get a 50% increase in my pipeline and it's the same quality, then I'll make 50% more money, right? So that is great. And I know what the lead costs me and so forth. And with the conversion rate, I know what a 1% bump in conversion rate means. And I know what kind of friction I have from working large teams. So if your packaging is very targeted towards these outcomes, then you can price the outcomes, and then you can price the value of those outcomes. A lot more on that in our next webinar next week. But it starts with packaging. So you cannot value price a packaging structure that isn't value packaged first. It has to fit together. So you build the packaging first that talks about the value, and then you can price it. I just want to talk about the last sort of bells and whistles on packaging here. The first is that you, of course, can have different types of value-based add-ons. So these are basically, if you have some sort of outcome, let's say pipeline conversion, large teams, then if you have other outcomes, let's say you have, sales recruiting, whatever, that's really important, but it doesn't really sort of fit into that sort of core structure that you have, like the tier structure, then you can sell it as an adjacent outcome, as an add-on. This also means that you can have another pricing model for it. Usually everything in a core tier structure up here needs to have the same pricing model, let's say price per sales rep or price per lead or whatever it is, where if you have something down here, you can actually choose a wholly different pricing model for it. You can say, hey, we're going to have a price per candidate if there's a recruitment tool, or a price per transaction if there's a payment tool or whatever, but it can be very different from the core structure. The second set of add-ons you can have is what I call hygiene or friction-based add-ons. So these are something like IT infrastructure, like integrations, deployments, so single tenant, multi-tenant, on-prem, if you do that sort of thing, third-party data. So these are actually not things that are relevant to your product per se, but basically things that are charged around it just to make it work. So you can absolutely also have this in your packaging. And then lastly, you can do services. I usually split services into recurring services and one-time services. So recurring services would be premium support, integration management, managed services, stuff like that. And one-time services would be onboarding, ad hoc PS. If you have a regulatory filing service, well, you'll do it if they ask you, that sort of thing. So I think this is actually sort of the quick run through of how to do it. I think the most times where we do packaging for our clients, where we are in the, let's say, 10K plus ACV, where we have relatively large, like not small contracts, not super small contracts. We do some format of a core value-based packaging structure, usually a tier structure, not always. We do some value-based add-ons, not always, but often we do one or two if it makes sense. We almost always do some friction-based add-ons, so what I call hygiene add-ons, so integrations and so forth. And we almost always do a few services. So you can almost use this like a check. You're saying, hey, do we have the right core structure here? Do we have any other outcomes that we generate for our customers that should be put into sort of an add-on? What kind of, let's say, non-core or hygiene-based add-on should we have? And what kind of services should we have? Map it out, and that's your new packaging also as an AI company. AI basically gets fit into most of this, but actually often or sometimes not into the add-ons, right? So it's like, oh, you're totally AI first on your core structure, but the add-ons are just regular software or just regular outcomes. And the integrations are integrations. They don't really get better with AI. They just integrate something else. And premium support is premium support regardless of AI anyways, right? So it's not, I think my point with this is that you kind of need these things too, even if you're an AI company, even though they're a little bit maybe boring or traditional or normal. Just get them done. They're actually good business. There's a reason why people have been doing them for decades. So yeah, they're gonna work for you too. Last, top 5 mistakes. So this is my opinion, but what I see is that people focus on selling AI instead of selling what the AI does, right? So it's like, okay, so I don't care about your AI, I care about my sales, or I don't care about your AI, I care about my customer satisfaction, or whatever it is, right? So customers care about not the technology, they care about the outcome that the technology brings. This is why you should package it in the right way via the outcomes. They put it behind barriers to entry, right? So they put it in, let's say, the top tier, or they put it in some sort of a like pay model in an add-on where it just costs money straight away, and not like this with an included volume where there is no paywall, where you just get access to everything straight away. And I think that is a mistake. They bundle it with premium. So this is an aggregated version of it. This is basically barrier to entry, the worst version. This is sort of where you put it up here, which is just where the least amount of customers will get access to your best features or your best functionality. So I think that is a double no-no. And then we have this no losses policy where, and this is usually sort of driven by the CFO office, where we, even though we might be able to, let's say, give away the product for free maybe, or for free with a fair usage policy, there are going to be a few customers that will be of a certain sort where they will actually make you lose money on something like this, which can make some companies then go with a paid model or with a consumption-based model or something else where it's, oh, we can't have a situation where we actually lose money on accounts. So we're actually going to introduce a price level or some pricing overall for all accounts to make that not happen. And so what you're doing here is that you're not seeing the forest for the trees, right? You're trying to solve some very small incremental edge cases with like a unified structure that's just hurting your whole go-to-market approach and your whole product rollout. So you should be willing to, as long as you make money on the overall introduction of AI, to lose money on a few accounts. That is perfectly fine. And it is one of the mistakes I see people make all the time, is that they don't want to lose money on any single accounts. And in so doing, they lose out on the big play where they could really make a splash with their AI in their existing customer base on the market. And then the last one is this, where cost of learning is pushed to the customer. So this is especially true if you have a product where there's just like a lot of potential, but the value is unproven. And then essentially we say, well, the customer needs to pay for it and then pay for all the usage and exploration of like figuring out how this actually works in a real live solution context with the customer. And they have to pay for every kind of mistake they have. Instead of you as the vendor saying, hey, we're going to make some of the users free or very, very cheap, but free is better. And then until we figure out what the value is. So this is also why I am a huge proponent of this model here, where we have included volume and then we charge based on volume after that, because this included volume allows the customer to learn and explore the product without hitting that paywall. And then that means that they're going to usually adopt a hell of a lot faster. All right. So that was it. Steve asks, in the included volume model, is the fee for the overage volume typically counted as ARR with the customers you work with? So it depends on how the structure is set up, right? So here at the start of the paid, you can have a license-based model where basically salespeople reach out and say, hey, you now need to buy. And then that is totally ARR. You can have a credit-based model, which is say, hey, you need to buy essentially prepaid usage that rots after a certain amount of time. Depending on how you structure the terms and conditions in credit models, you can get it approved as ARR. I've done that in both GAAP and IFRS accounting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the fourth webinar we have. And then the only thing that remains is usage-based pricing. So usage-based pricing can count as ARR in some instances. I've seen rulings for and against. I tend to never really understand why it's such a big fuss. Like, money is money. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a monetizable habit with your customers. So if they have reoccurring revenue, so they're buying it again and again and again and again, then it has a very high degree of predictability, which is what then generates the enterprise value and the forecasting ability and the cash flow and all these things. So I think actually each model can get you there, but licenses and credit, so licenses are the more, let's say, certain, credits secondarily so, but they definitely can be certain, usage the least, but it can still work. I hope that's enough for you, Steve. But typically, yes. Mark, here you ask again, what's your take on communicating explicitly that a result is achieved by AI? I do have a hypothesis that in some cases this may be off-putting, and a better idea would be to communicate the result a client is paying for, not necessarily that it is achieved by exploitation of AI. I agree, right? So I think actually a little bit of the romance is over with AI. In a sense, it got real, like it's there and it's hugely valuable, and lean into it hard from a product perspective. But it's not better just because it's made by AI. I think it has more promise of getting done faster and maybe like at higher scale, all of these things with AI. Maybe there are things that now previously was impossible because of the cost structure and the manual labor involved, and which now is possible, even at an acceptable quality with AI. So I think these are some of the things that you communicate. I think a lot of my customers are like explicitly selling AI functionality, and they're AI first in their narrative, and their customers tend to respond to it strongly, but it's often in connection with specific use cases, right? So it's saying it can do X for you, it can do Y for you. This is awesome because you need both X and Y in your business. So it's tied to the use case and the outcome, and it's a little bit less. I very rarely see people just saying, "Hey, it's a blank canvas and can do anything for you." That usually does not sell. Mid asks, how does consumption-based versus outcome-based differ primarily? So it doesn't. It doesn't. So consumption basically means that I am using something, and outcome has to do with what is that something that I'm using. So what are we counting? So sometimes when you say consumption-based, sometimes it means, or more typically it means that there's some sort of an input, like a token, OpenAI token, an API call, so some sort of infrastructure-related thing. These things usually would be at an input in a value creation process for a customer, which means that there are resource and then there are costs, where an outcome is something that customers want. So let's say I use OpenAI tokens to run my AI model to generate leads for my business. The tokens are the inputs, the leads are the outcome. I can count both, I can price both. So generally, if we want a higher price and we want to price the value, we want to price an outcome. If we want a ton of different customers and we want a very horizontal software that can be applied broadly across a lot of different use cases, we want to price inputs and we want to be an infrastructure play. So they're just different in the way that they operate. It's very, very hard for something like, let's say, AWS to value price. They're just saying, hey, we're just providing the plumbing for the cloud. You do with it what you want. We know that it's valuable, but there are going to be customers who get a ton of value out of it and other customers get less value, and we're fine with that. That's not part of our monetization model. But if you niche down and say, hey, we do something for single location dentists, then you can create a pricing model that is extremely focused on the value output for that particular type of customer. So that's often what we're thinking about. Go to the webinar next week and I will deep dive on this a ton. That's basically what that is about. You also asked, do we have some running projects where I can do freelancing and learn from practical experience? I'll bypass that one a bit. So if you want experience with AI, there's a whole world waiting for you out there. And Patrick asks, have you seen the included volume model used where the price for the next X transactions is fixed and then the next Y transactions also fixed? So a staircase graph versus a straight line. I'm thinking that many customers would use up until they have to pay. If they face a threshold price for a large number of additional transactions versus pay as you go, this might overcome adoption issues. Also, many companies don't have instrumentation to track bill per unit. Yeah, so this is a little bit like a niche issue. So I call this granularity. So let's say that you price per API call, right? So you hit this included volume and then you price per API call. You can say, well, the absolutely smallest unit is one API call, right? And you'd price it 0.0000 whatever, something, right? Like a very, very small price. What actually happens mostly is that people price per thousand or millionth API call. So they bulk it a little bit. Hey, like we're not going to price you per one API call, we're going to price you per like a chunk of million, and then we're going to charge like a few $100 for that, right? So it's still a small invoice, it's a few $100, but like the unit is larger, million, not single. So, and then of course you can do this a lot. So if you go to, I think Monday.com had this in there, we're going to hope this a little bit. So they actually have a team size here. It says 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, right? So Monday.com has what I call an expanding granularity, right? You can buy 3 seats, then you can buy 5, that's 2 more. Then you can buy 10, that's 5 more. Then another 5, another 5, another 5, another 5, and then it starts to jump by increments of 10. So they have an expanding granularity here. You just have the same for whatever you do, right? So you just say you buy this in brackets of whatever 10,000 units or 200 units, whatever makes sense for you. And then as the volume of the account goes up, you can also have a change in the size of the brackets. So if you do it that way, you can make the smallest entry-level bracket a not too big jump. So like Monday.com do here, they do 3 seats. Most people can afford like 3D seats. So they'll be like $29 a month, like 27, sorry, or what, depending on the plan that I choose. So it's something like that you do. Hans says, no way you're going to be able to price leads. Depends on the software. I've done it a few times. So yeah, it's doable depending on what the solution is, right? So you'd say something like, I'll give you an example, Vault.com, Hungry.com, they basically price leads. So they say, hey, they price customers, right? But some versions of those companies, they also just price the preamble to that. They price the leads. A lot of meeting booking in traditional sales, they will book a meeting for you. They price per book meeting, and then they price that lead, right? So there's a lot of business models that already price per leads. And yes, there's an attribution problem. And as you're mentioning, every lead gen agency has a hard time using it, but they're still using it, right? So not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying it gets done. And then how would I quantify? This is still Hans, you ask, how would you quantify the dollar value of a lead? Qualifications, super hard execution, great insight. Well, this also gets down to exactly who are you doing it for. So I've done price per lead in banking, so retail banking, where the cost of a lead is very well known. And since you're doing only retail banking, you get to price that very, very well. If you do all sorts of different financial services, also, let's say, pensions, insurance, everything else, that now makes it harder because they have different lead values, right? So the more you niche down, the more, let's say, precise you can be on the value that you charge for that particular niche, which helps you a lot. So I'll make that the last comment here. I appreciate that you took the time on this Thursday to check in yet again. I'll see you next week. We're going to have a blast on AI pricing models part 1 with outcome-based pricing. All right. Take care.